good week so far?
Sweet.
I heard some amazing news tonight that I have to share.
I bet it's about snow.
I heard next Thursday they're talking 19 inches. Yes.
You fell down and hit your head. Again.
There's some people starting to report that.
You know, for once, I'm on your side.
Because you don't have to push it
You
now.
bet. Shut
Justin?
the roads down, boys and girls.
Justin, you're not funny either.
Yeah,
You're
well,
fine with staying home, right?
You know, well, actually, more fatalities is not good.
Yeah. But I heard that there was, I've been seeing there's talk of a possible blizzard next week. Temperatures are supposed to be low, but I was the first time that I heard 19 plus inches, so possible. But, you know, we're still a week out, so everything could change.
Quarter inch.
We hope that.
Three flex.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was watching I was seeing some weather reports for the Upper Michigan, you know, a couple weeks ago, and they, you know, we talk about 3 to 7 inches. They were saying 3 to 7 feet. So.
There's the lakes.
Well, you know, it'd be great to get some of that.
80
sometime.
west of Grand Island was closed, or not, west of there.
Yeah,
But
through Nebraska.
Into Wyoming, it was closed.
They got a lot out there
Yeah.
this last storm. Well, places in Iowa got up to 10 inches. Northern Iowa.
But we didn't.
Yes, I know, but it'll come.
We need the push.
It'll come.
It'll rain, that's fine.
We haven't had a really good storm since I think it was 2008 or 2009.
That's okay.
Snowstorm.
I mean, this day,
Oh,
how many years
that
ago?
was an ice storm when we got
Uh-huh.
married.
That was bad enough.
And then we got 10 inches of snow when we went to Columbia that night. It was 10 inches of snow. But yeah, that was 15 years ago. Crazy. All right, so we are looking at profanity and gossip, lesson 10. I think hopefully got enough books. There's handouts in the back if we don't have one. But we talked about the tongue. So we focused on Sunday by looking at James chapter 3. And what are some key things that we looked at in James 3, specifically 1 through 12? What are some key things about the tongue that we noticed there? What was the context? Let's say that first. What was the context of James chapter 3?
Can't control the tongue, or it's hard to tame.
Yeah, it's hard to tame. And matter of fact, it even said that the tongue is unable to be tamed. And since it's not able to be tamed, that means we have to be working, putting a lot of effort to control it. It's something that we have to put a lot of time into. And in the context of James 3, you have verse 1, which is talking about teachers. Those that are teachers. So you can really look at James 3, 1 through 12 and notice that it is talking about being able to practice what you preach. And so not everyone should be teachers. We looked at that Sunday morning. Not everyone should be teachers, but as we see one that is a teacher, anybody, honestly, the principle is there for everyone, is to be able to control their tongues. And we see how important our tongue can be and how destructive it really can be. A person can be really good at something, but yet they loosely use their tongue and it can destroy their reputation. It can destroy everything they've done. But also, it is extremely useful because of what it can do, also for God. And notice, I really like the illustrations that James uses there. The first one was the bit in a horse's mouth. We understand horses have a lot of power, and that bit is able to control that power. You think about a rudder on a ship. That was the second example. How small that rudder is and how big that ship is, and yet that little rudder in comparison to the size of the ship can control that big amount of mass. It can control that huge ship in the direction it goes. And so the lesson there is that you and I, with our tongues, have an amazing amount of power, really, in what we can do. And so being able to control that tongue and be able to control that, where we direct that power, makes a big impact. And so That's where we finished up, was talking about that in James chapter 3. That was paragraph 2. And so let's get into the next paragraph here. Let me get in my notes. And somebody want to read paragraph 3. I think it's 3. Yeah,
One
paragraph 3.
improper use of the tongue is swearing or using the name of God loosely. The third of the Ten Commandments states, Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Exodus 20, verse 7. The psalmist said in the reference to God, Holy and reverend is his name. Psalms 111, verse 9. Often God's name is used in swearing. Jesus taught against swearing. He called for honest communication in all things. Matthew 5:33 through 37.
All right, so somebody read, we see Exodus 20 verse 7 stated there, but somebody read Psalm 111 verse 9.
He sent redemption unto his people. He hath commanded his covenant forever. Holy and reverend is his name.
All right, so holy and awesome. What does holy mean? What does it mean to be holy? Pure. So it's saying that God's name is holy, it's pure. And so keeping something pure, think about keeping something pure. As Christians, we are striving to keep ourselves pure, right? And so we do not stain our lives with sin. So with God's name being pure, being holy, you can look at it two different ways. Holy as in held above everything else. But really that's what the word awesome is focused on there. Some people say you can't say the word awesome because it's used here in reference to God's name. I don't think that's the case. I've used that. I would say the storm next week is going to be awesome. But you see that it's just a word describing how great God's name is. And so think about it being pure, thinking about it being elevated above all things. Why would we taint God's name into something that's not good? Exodus 20 and verse 7, which was the verse there stated, it says, Do not take the Lord thy God's name in vain. What does vain mean?
Empty.
Okay, emptiness. You think about in the book of Proverbs, the psalm or the writer there, Solomon, he talks about how many things are vain, empty. Okay, what else could the word vain be attributed to? Definition. Could be also an evil, in the sense of it's being attributed to something that's evil or doing something wicked, vain. And so both actually really reference there. But so think about taking God's name in vain. What does that mean?
You're not being reverent to him.
Yeah, it's using it in a purpose that is not to be. We talk about we say God's name. It's to be something that we hold very high. Think about starting your prayers. In school they talked about starting our prayers like Jesus did, in a sense. Hallowed be thy name. And that phrase, hallowed be thy name, we don't have to say hallowed be thy name. It's not a word we use. But we could say great and powerful is your name. And in a sense, it's holding God's name above everything else. And so to take something like God's name that is to be holy and awesome and defiling it by using it in an improper way, what does that do to his name? Brings it down. Degrades it. It puts it to a low state of what people think of God's name. And so we see using God's name in that way is something we should not do. Now think about this. How would you like it if someone used your name in a way that's always something bad. Think about that. You know, you wouldn't want somebody to use your name vainly, because then it becomes where anybody hears your name, what do they think of?
Nothing good.
Yeah, nothing good. And that's what happens to God's name when it's used incorrectly. It's not elevated to the way it should be. When God's name is used, it should be something that people listen up to. And so holy and reverent is his name. And so somebody read Matthew 5, 33 through 37.
Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from me.
All right, so I know that the word swearing and swear is being used here, but I know the book used this verse here. I know where he's kind of going with this, but the word swear here, is this in reference to someone saying a cuss word? No.
More of an oath.
It's an oath. We're looking at oaths here. And so I see where he's going with this, and that using this passage, he's saying honest communication in all things. We're going to be honest. We're to be a person that's honest in all that we do. And our communication should be honest. And so I see where he's going with this and using that, but it's not in a reference to swearing. And in that case, think about this. When Peter denied Christ, what did it say he did? The third time. He swore. A lot of people say, well, he was cussing in that. That word used there, he was not cussing. He was saying, I promise. I'm telling you as we would, some would say on my mother's grave or something like that, that I am telling you the truth. That's exactly what Peter was doing there. So kind of a side note, since we're talking about oaths here, that's what Peter was doing. He wasn't cussing. And so going back to our notes, let's see. Looking at swearing. We looked at Exodus 20, verse 7. Somebody read Leviticus 19 and verse 12.
And you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord.
All right, so in using and talking about oaths, it's focusing on that too, and not using God's name to swear upon something that they're going to do. Don't use it falsely, but also do not use it vainly, as we're looking at here. It's supposed to be reverenced. Somebody read Hebrews 12 and verse 28. Actually, a verse in 29 with it. Should have been with that.
Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire.
All right, so we're told to serve God with reverence. What does it mean to be reverent?
Hold it in high esteem.
Okay. Hold it in high esteem, respectful. We're to be reverent with God, serve God with reverence, and godly fear. The word fear used here means to be scared. Sometimes we need to be. A lot of times when the word fear is used in the Bible, it's meaning to have a respect for God. It's to have that reverence, that respect. But that word reverence is already used here. And so by saying we are to serve God with godly fear, that is knowing what God can do. In the jail we talked about Jesus and how humble he was. but we also talked about how just God is. You look at the life of Christ. Christ stated that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So the attributes of Christ, the things that he did, really demonstrate the Father, demonstrate what God is able to do. Jesus was very humble. Jesus was merciful. Jesus was compassionate, but Jesus was also just. You have several occasions where Jesus did not tolerate sin. He did not tolerate the things that were there. And so you think about Jesus, you think about that godly fear. Jesus was able, and we talked about this, to call 10,000 angels. That's a song we sing, right? When he was on the cross, what did one angel do to 185,000 Assyrians in the Old Testament? One angel was able to wipe out 185,000 people like that. And Jesus had the power to be able to call 10,000 angels. You also think about the one angel that passed over Egypt, that killed all the firstborn. God has the power to do anything he wants. That should give us some fear, and a scared fear. And so when we're applying this to what we're talking about here, we should have enough fear of God that we do not use his name vainly. We do not use his name in a bad light, because we should have that reverence for God. And that's why I wanted to read verse 29, because it really explains that godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire. God is a loving God, sent Christ to this earth to be that perfect sacrifice for us, to give us a plan of salvation. He was merciful, but God is also a just God. And he will punish those that do not obey him. And so God will punish those that do not hold his name in esteem. We should have a godly fear of him. And that applies to anything. We're using it here in the sense of his name, but having a proper fear of God is nothing different than it's a different level, but our children should have a godly, or not a godly fear, but a parental fear of their parents, right? That if they do something that they shouldn't, that's something they're going to be disciplined. And that's a proper, healthy fear. It teaches them to have respect. And when they get older, they have that respect for God. I've told our kids before, the only reason we do that is so that you will learn that someday you're always going to answer to somebody. They answer to us as parents, but I told them, I said, I have to answer to somebody too, and that's God. And I have to answer to other people who have jobs. And so having that proper fear. All right, so let's move to the next paragraph. Somebody read paragraph 4 now, please.
Another poor use of the tongue is the use of profanity or cursing. These words are heard on television, at ball games, in your hallway at school, etc. Should these words be part of the Christian's vocabulary? Paul told Timothy to be an example to the believers in word, 1 Timothy 4:12. Further, Paul wrote in Ephesians 4:21, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. Are curse words corrupt communication? Are they good for edifying or building up God's church? What about euphemisms? When one uses a milder form of an expletive, keep in mind that the euphemism is still a form of the actual curse word. It is wrong to use them.
All right. So we're looking at profanity now, or cursing, as some would say. And so going back to my notes, here's a quote from Kenny Townsley. Stated this: one study showed that between 10 and 20 swear words were used per 1,000 words of dialogue in some of the most popular shows. So some of the most popular shows today, you have 10 and 20, between 10 and 20 swear words are used within 1,000 words. That's a lot. And then it had I've never seen South Park. I've seen clips of it. It's terrible. But one episode of South Park used a word that the FCC deems obscene 200 times in one episode. If I remember right, their episodes are only like a normal 30-minute episode on TV. So what is that, 17, 20 minutes? So they used one word the FCC claims to be obscene 200 times in 17 minutes to 18 minutes. That is a lot. You think about some of the shows. Does the FCC regulate everything that's on TV? Where does FCC not have no regulations?
What is the FCC?
Well, the FCC is the federal guidelines for what can be on TV. So what's allowed to be. So we talked about once, for a PG-13 rating, you can only have the F word once.
Some commission.
Yep, commission. So I think for a PG-13 movie, you can only have the F word once in the whole movie. Yeah, I didn't do that. I don't know if this guy did or not. Whose job is that? It's just like what we talked about. Whose job was it to filter the stuff on Facebook? Don't want that job. Yeah, so you think about the FCC, they only regulate what's on TV. Everything that's on Netflix, everything that's on HBO, stuff like that, is not regulated by the FCC. That is why everything is going that direction, because they can do whatever they want. It's a streaming service. You're paying for it. And so those numbers go way up when you look at some of the streaming services that are out there and what they're allowed to do. Not just in language, but also in nudity and sex and stuff like that, which we've talked about before. Then also the next quote says, looking at the Billboard Top 100, this is from 2017, so I know it's a few years ago, but more than 2/3 of the songs that were charted #1 feature explicit lyrics. And so a high amount of songs that are on the radio. I mean, you hear them. It's interesting, some stations, they'll play certain songs and allow some words and some don't. I don't know how that works. Can allows any word, I think. It seems like. But you go to listen to St. Joe and they'll have the same song and they'll leave out some of the words. So I don't know how they regulate that or how they choose that.
By the FCC.
Who is?
The radio is.
Radio is. Yeah. The FCC, they're going to allow a certain amount of things. But as we've talked about before, federal regulations on stuff is never what God approves of. And so we've got to be careful. So thinking about it, the reason I brought those up is the shows that that are on TV that can be watched. There's a great amount of language being used. Not only that, the amount that is on streaming services, which I don't have anything but streaming services. We don't have regular TV. We're too far from the city to get free TV for the most part. So we're in the middle between Kansas City and Des Moines. So we get just streaming stuff. And so that stuff's going to be on there because they're not regulated. You think about that, and we've got to be careful in what's on the radio too, what we hear on the radio. Somebody said the other day you have like Pandora, you can get rid of explicit lyrics, and Madison was talking about that. You can. It's a good thing to do because of what our kids are hearing, and we shouldn't hear it either. When I was growing up, there was somebody I knew who was a Christian. His parents allowed him to watch movies that had crazy amount of language in them because he thought that exposing them to that would be a good thing. So they were used to it. Did not work out well, just say that. Because it's just not a good thing to do. So we're looking at language, some of the verses used here. Somebody read 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12. Yep, 4:12. 1 Timothy 4:12.
Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity.
All right, this is a verse we looked at last youth night, well, a couple youth nights ago. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12. You know, Paul's talking to youth here, but it's a principle for all of us. But he says, let them be an example. We talked about the example part. An example is, it's like a billboard. A Christian is like a billboard. A Christian is like an advertisement to the world of what the church is like and what Christ is like. And so when thinking about that, the things that we say are extremely important, because what do they shed? I mean, what do they reflect? Who do they actually come back to? It can put a good light or a bad light on the church, right? And so 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12 said to be an example in word. So in the things that we say, we've got to be careful. You know, Paul wrote in Ephesians 4:29, which is the verse that was here in the lesson, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. What could fall under corrupt communication? Here we're talking specifically about profanity, but what else could fall under that?
Gossip.
Okay, gossip, which we're going to talk about. What else? Lying. Yeah. We've talked about it last lesson. What else?
Negativity, maybe.
Yeah, really could. Negativity. It could also include, jokes that are not, good to say. Talking about things that are not good. Corrupt communication. So corrupt communication encompasses a lot of things, but specifically what we're talking about here is profanity. But think about that. It doesn't just mean profanity. It can mean many of those different things. They should not be something that proceeds out of our mouth. But what should come out is what is good to the use of edifying. What is edifying? Building up. So you think about that. Anything that is opposite of what builds up somebody should not come out of our mouth. That's hard to do. That's hard to say. You can get caught in a situation where maybe talking bad about somebody. It's easy to do, especially in a group of people. It could be saying something negative, as Lindsay mentioned. If it doesn't edify, it should not be something that comes out of our mouth. And that's, it's easy to say that, but what did James chapter 3 tell us? It's going to be hard to apply. It's something we got to continually work on. That means if we're working on it, that means we're still going to mess up once in a while. But we got to work at controlling our tongues. So euphemisms. We don't usually think about euphemisms. And what is a euphemism?
It's a substitution for a curse word.
All right, it's a substitution. It really is. The definition is the meaning a mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be harsh, too harsh, or blunt when referring to something unpleasant or embarrassing. And so you could almost say, using words like somebody passed away, that would be a euphemism. Now, is that bad to say? No, because what is the real word?
Died.
Somebody died. But we would say somebody passed away because that's a little bit easier for someone to take. So just because it's a substitution does not mean it's bad. But the substitution is, when it's bad, is when it's substituting that something is bad that we shouldn't say. And so that comes into some of the words, and I listed some of them here. I'm not going to read them, but they're there for you to read.
But just like the OMG, I mean, a lot of people say that when things are pleasant.
Yep.
But that's not the point.
No.
Because they're still using God's name.
It's used improperly.
But I mean, it's not always the unpleasant or embarrassing. Sometimes it's good things.
Yep.
That they say those words.
You're right. That's a good point, because it's not to be an evil thing or a bad thing in life, but like you said, it's still used improperly.
Yeah.
So it should not be used. But OMG, you see that in texting a lot. Some will say OMG. Or
what's the difference between that and just saying, oh my? I'm just asking.
I don't think there is a difference. I don't know. thought about that one because you're, in a sense, you're stopping right before you say the word. What is that? What do you, a lot of the time you think of? Well, what are we really trying to say? I've thought about that one. Some, euphemism. A euphemism for God would be goodness. Say, well, oh my goodness. Well, that's a substitute for the real word. We know what it is. Somebody would say, other words like fiddlesticks or something like that. Well, what's that? You know what they're trying to say. And you think about it, sometimes it's hard, when you break something, or as a mechanic working on stuff, it's very frustrating. You got to be careful what you say when things are not going well, which is every time you work on something. So
That's why you throw the hammer or the
I know.
wrench.
That's a better option. Throw something.
Depends on if she didn't bring me the right one.
Is violence the next thing?
Yeah.
Control your anger.
Yeah. Debbie had a good point. Control our anger, Andy.
You can only kick something so many times before your foot hurts.
But euphemism is something we don't really think a lot about. But we've got to be careful because if we're trying to substitute a word, then obviously we're trying to just not say the word, but we're still trying to say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what can
Just
you
yell,
do?
just scream, right? Scream as loud as you can.
Ouch. Really long. Hang it out.
Yeah. There's just got to be other ways. And so euphemism. So think about that. We're out of time. We'll pick up here on Sunday. But thanks for you guys' time tonight. And they're waiting at the door for us.